Hi there.
Hi there.
Sonia and Michael from the Urban Homestead Academy. What are we going to talk about today, Michael, in regards to food security?
What we're going to have a look at today is what's happening in the nation of Sri Lanka, a nation of 22 million people, and I've sort of referred to Sri Lanka as the canary in the coal mine. The reason why I say that is because a lot of the issues that Sri Lanka are having in the area of food security at the moment are the very same issues that a lot of Western countries are having at the moment or are going to have in the next 6 to 12 months. I'm talking about issues like fertiliser shortages, supply chain issues, rising inflation, fuel shortages, rising interest rates, all this sort of thing. And these are the very issues that have, if you like, allowed Sri Lanka to get to the point where they are now facing a humanitarian crisis. So that's why I want to have a look at what's happening in Sri Lanka today. So our first article just starts off with the title, Sri Lanka faces man-made food crisis as farmers stop planting. So the once self-sufficient nation reels from fallout of ill-conceived shift to organic agriculture, compounded by fuel shortages. So this is I like this sort of articles. It talks about the human side of things. So this particular farmer, his name's Mahinda, and we'll just go through what some of the things he's sort of talking about at a ground level, at a farming level. So he's saying that he's 49, Mahinda's 49, he will not be planting paddy this season, obviously that's rice. So after a government ban on chemical fertilisers cut his rice yield in half during the March harvest, the farmer who owns 8 hectares, that's 20 acres of paddy and banana, said he no longer has the income to maintain a farm, especially as his banana crop also looks set to fail. So why is it failing? He goes on to say it's a total loss, Mahinda says. The father of 5 said in mid-April, standing in a field of stunted banana trees in Sri Lanka's southern district. When I look at this, I know I cannot get the usual yield. So he says everything has collapsed. He said I don't know what to do. So he's obviously in a very, very difficult situation at the time. He goes on to say that most smallholder farmers in his village also say they will not be irrigating their fields in the current growing season, which runs from May to August. It's known as the Yala season. They say the fertiliser ban induced crop failures coming amid nationwide fuel shortages make farming untenable. So obviously there was a ban on fertilisers. So from this, what this article is actually saying is that there was a government introduced a policy to go organic, and if you like, they try to go cold turkey. And a lot of people don't realise that a lot of modern crops, when we talk about fruit trees, when we talk about paddy, rice and wheat and all that, they're basically being bred to take in high fertiliser inputs, high pesticide inputs. And if you try to sort of grow those same type of trees and crops organically, they don't yield as much. Basically, when you go organic, you have to have a look at the whole structure of your gardening setup. You have to use varieties that are more suited to your natural environment, heritage type crops that are actually adapted to your local variety, whether it's Sri Lanka, whether it's North America, whether it's Australia. So they've tried to adopt organic principles using the regular type of high yield varieties. So they've come across as a bit of a disaster at the moment. So this Mahinda is actually talking through what he's actually going through at the moment. So he goes on to say, because of all what's happened there, I can't take the risk of farming now. I will only be growing enough food to feed my family. So you can sort of see the desperation, along with a lot of other farmers in Sri Lanka are actually facing. You know, the yields are down. They face basically getting out of the industry altogether. So it's quite interesting and concerning, really.
Big impact on those local villages that were probably relying on farmers like him to provide, that produce. So you can't blame people if they can't make any money. You can't farm at a loss, can you? You can only do that for so long.
Yes, definitely, yes,
So this is interesting. So the Movement for Land and Agricultural Reform, a non-government organisation, says that most smallholder farms in surrounding districts and in key agricultural regions, in the north and the south was mentioned previously, are also halting operations this season. So a lot are just are not even going to, do any sort of farming there. That could leave Sri Lanka, which is already grappling with shortages of imported foodstuffs amid its worst ever economic crisis, facing widespread shortages of domestically grown and produced food too. And this is interesting because the article started off with Sri Lanka used to be self-sufficient.
Yes, it's interesting.
Self-sufficient with their food, and so this is where they're heading. They're saying that it's going to be a very hard period in the coming few months in terms of the food aspect. There will be food shortages, not there may, there will be, and we have to be prepared. And then it talks about the fertiliser ban, which is one of the factors.
Just one of the factors,
which is contributing to Sri Lanka's food shortages. So 22 million people, they used to be self-sufficient in their food. There was the banning of these chemicals and pesticides, which is having a significant impact on their food security. I mean, and that's great to go organic, isn't it? Like you said, it's good to be able to do that. But a lot of the produce they're growing is not been designed to be grown organically.
No, and it's easy to go organically when you're growing food in your own backyard because you have control over what varieties you're growing, and you can mix and match some of the varieties. But when you're growing set varieties and you just try to go cold turkey, it makes it very, very difficult.
Yes. But, you can see why they were wanting to go organic. They were saying that they wanted to improve their soil health in Sri Lanka. And there was also a mysterious kidney disease amongst farmers, which they thought might have been linked to the chemicals. So obviously they wanted to go, clean, green and organic. But they did it so quickly that it had such a significant impact on the food produce. So...
this one here, look, the official figures, they're not yet available for the Maha harvest, but experts estimate a drop of between 20 to 70%. So that's a huge decrease in the growth of their farming produce. For rice, a staple of the Sri Lanka diet, output fell with rice between 40 and 50% nationwide. So that's according to some estimates. So you see some very, very dramatic falls in their outputs of a lot of the basic foodstuffs. So all of this comes as Sri Lanka also reels from a foreign exchange crisis. They're having a financial crisis as well. So they've got sky-high inflation and also long queues for diesel. They've got rolling electricity cuts. And there are also warnings of a catastrophic number of deaths from a lot of the doctors there. And so a lot of these areas that we just think they're the sort of things that are affecting Western agriculture as well now. So that's why we talked about the canary in the coal mine. So what we're seeing is played out in real time is what's happening in Sri Lanka. That if we don't get on top of some of these issues that they unfortunately didn't get on top of them early enough, could very well come home to roost in Western countries.
And Western countries are starting to talk about that, and we'll show an article at the end of this. And what we are seeing in Sri Lanka is, people are protesting.
Yes.
There's been a lot of protests, there's been riots, people are very angry with the government, with the Prime Minister. And they are looking at strategies, so they're looking to the International Monetary Fund for bailouts and needing help there. So so the next article I thought we could have a look at, Michael, is what is Sri Lanka actually doing?
Yeah, well, it's actually interesting. Before we go there, it's someone once said we're only 1 meal away from anarchy, and with the riots that are happening in Sri Lanka, it won't be any different in Western countries. You might live in a very, very modern Western country, but if there's no food in those supermarkets, you'll find that a once civilised country can turn rogue very, very quickly. So that's what's happening in Sri Lanka. There's riots in the streets, there's violence. We need to be getting on top of this in our Western countries ASAP.
Yeah. All right, so one of the strategies that Sri Lanka are looking, or actually have implemented, is workers in the gardens growing food.
This is amazing, because the other food security talk we did, and was a lot of the countries like China are actually asking their people to go out and be food secure. So here Sri Lanka is actually saying to its government workers, we actually want you to take a day a week off, go out in your own backyards and start growing your own food. So the island nation asked public sector employees to take off Fridays to grow crops in their own backyards in a bid to forestall a looming food shortage. And this is, we're getting to the point where we're going the full circle at the moment, because often we've relied on huge multinational corporations, growing food on huge monocultures to give us food security. But here's Sri Lanka going back to a grassroots type of food security, where they want their own people to grow their own food, and they realise that a lot of the faith they had in the big big overall structures of the modern food system are not working at the moment, and people are going hungry.
Yes.
So they're saying to people, we want you to go back to work and actually grow your own food in your own backyard. So it's really interesting.
Yes, make them use of their own gardens.
Yeah.
But I wonder how many Sri Lankans have actually been growing their own food and know how to do that.
Well, that's the other issue again. One of the things with a lot of countries, like developing countries like Sri Lanka, is that in some ways they're a lot better suited to a readaptation of the food security system, because most of the food is grown on little subsistence farms.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of knowledge, some core knowledge on growing food in these countries that most people have or can pass on to someone else. Whereas in Western nations, we don't have that.
No.
So we've lost a lot of the skills that we once had. So even going back to the Second World War, we don't have those food growing skills anymore.
No.
So a country like Sri Lanka is far more, they can adapt far quicker to growing their own food in their own backyards than, say, a place like Australia where people don't have that knowledge base.
Yes.
But that's what the government is saying. They want
shrinking knowledge base.
It's a shrinking, a rapidly shrinking knowledge base.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so Sri Lanka's approved a 4-day work week for the public sector workers to grow this food. They're saying, obviously, it's the worst financial crisis in decades that they're seeing. They employ about 1 million, although another report I did see said about, I think, 2 million. So about 1 million people in its public sector, obviously struggling to pay for things. So they're actually doing it for a 3-month period, which I thought was interesting. So they're going to give these public sector workers leave every Friday for the next 3 months. But as we know with growing cycles, sometimes it can take a good 6 months.
I maintain that you really want a year's lead up time, especially to grow different sort of crops at different times of the year, to be able to prep your land, to be able to get everything organised. From a crisis situation, I think it probably takes at least 12 months, 6 months at the minimum. So Sri Lanka are starting late, but at least to their credit, they are starting.
Yes. To
say to people, look, they're actually being honest with their people, saying, look, we are facing a crisis here. We all need to do something as a country together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And when you're saying 12 months lead-in time, that's like setting up, isn't it? Setting up beds and gardens and things like that. But then we know when you're growing crops, a lot of crops can take several months, up to 6 months, to produce. But obviously, warmer climate, would you say? And maybe they're focusing on things that grow quickly. Maybe that's why the 3-month goal.
They would be too.
Yeah.
And also, the farmer, Mahinda, was saying that they didn't get appropriate support in terms of the infrastructure like organic fertilisers. So they wanted to go organic, but you can do organic sprays, you can use organic fertilisers, but they didn't have that set up in place. So they were trying to sort of use modern type varieties that have been bred for high yields, but also high input costs.
Yes.
And they weren't set up. So you've got to. It takes time to be able to set up your own organic fertiliser, for example. If you want to make your own organic fertiliser, you need your chickens. You need to be able to sort of brew that fertiliser to green teas, things like that. It does take time.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not something you can do
might have to
overnight.
grow the plants for the fertiliser, like comfrey or...
Yes, that's another thing. You grow. So I would say 12-month lead-up time to get yourself...
To be fully productive.
In a home garden. Yeah.
Okay, but look, at least they're having a go. They're putting their public sector workforce into that.
And also, too, the other interesting point to note is that the government are saying to their workers they're still going to pay them for 5 days' work, but they're actually going to only work 4 days for the government and 1 day. So effectively, they're subsidising their workers to work in there. So they're not saying that their workers, we're only going to pay you 4 days, and the other day you go home and do it yourself. They're actually the government of Sri Lanka subsidising people to actually work. So it's very interesting.
So they're working for the government growing food.
They're working for the government growing food. They're very interesting.
That was interesting. I was very interested when I saw that report. The United Nations has warned of a dire humanitarian crisis. Said 4 out of 5 people in the nation of 22 people are forced to skip meals. So that's actually, they're saying that's happening now, 4 out of 5 people. And they're planning on providing 47 million to help more than 1 million vulnerable people. And they're also looking at, the other strategies that they're looking at is, direct lines of credit as well. So there was, talk about getting some more funds from the International Monetary Fund. And they're saying that they need at least $5 billion to meet essential imports for the rest of the year.
It's interesting because they were a net exporter of food up until 2 years And now, because of some really poor decisions and lack of planning, now they're going to be a net importer of food. So now they're relying on other countries, and other countries have got, as we looked at that in our other report, they've got the same problems. Yes, so
everyone's trying to secure the scarcity of resources out there now.
Another strategy that Sri Lanka are currently doing, they're trying to encourage some of their citizens to get jobs overseas. But that's I don't know, we've got to...
yes, look, that might be in the other report, but they were... Actually, no, maybe it is in this one. Oh, here it is, sorry, yes, we missed this bit. The government also said any public sector employees who want to travel abroad to find work would be given up to 5 years of unpaid leave without affecting their current positions. Yeah,
that's interesting, but the problem is that a lot of Western countries we're finding are having our own difficult financial times and economic times as well, and this is the canary in the coal mine, so it's not going to work because most governments will not want mass immigration in the next few years because they've got to try and look after their own workers and their own inflationary pressures and economic pressures. So really, probably to me, the most important strategy with Sri Lanka is they're getting their own people to plant their own gardens. We haven't seen that in the West yet, but we should be doing that now ourselves.
Yes,
we should be learning from what Sri Lanka have gone through and saying, okay, let's get some of our own food planted in our own gardens.
Yeah. So I thought that was a really interesting report, really good strategy that the government's using there. And here's another one that they're looking at as well, bringing in the army.
Well, they're bringing the army, I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? Sri Lankan army to cultivate land to ramp up food production. So that's how desperate they believe the situation is going to become. It's bad now, but to call in the army to grow food, that is quite amazing. It reminds me of what they did in the Second World War in Great Britain, where they called in the army of farmers. You know, they called in people to labour on the farms to produce food during those wartime years. So they're doing a very similar thing. They've got their actually army to do that.
So the Sri Lankan army will cultivate over 1,500 acres of barren or abandoned state land, taking part in the government's cultivation drive aimed at multiplying food production and averting any shortage in the future. That's a very recent report that's just come out with the plan there. And the troops will be first prepare the ground. Obviously, there's a lot of preparation, weeding, tilling, preparing.
It takes time.
And cultivating of selected seed varieties that they're going to be doing, and they were looking at identifying what lands are available.
That's an interesting. I didn't see that one previously, but they talked about selected seed varieties. So obviously, they are looking at sort of more varieties that are more adapted to organic farming.
Yeah.
So they're looking at different varieties. So they're looking at from a broad picture point of view.
Yeah, but in the meantime, they are importing rice, so 50,000 metric tonnes of rice under an Indian credit line to curb prices. In March, India extended a $1 billion credit line to cash-strapped Sri Lankan government.
But the sad thing about that is Sri Lanka were not only were they self-sufficient in rice production until recent times, but they were a net exporter of rice.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden, not only have they not got enough rice for their own consumption, but now they've actually got to allow another country to bring rice in.
Yes.
So this is what can happen very quickly.
Yes, yes. Things need to be very well thought out, don't they, in regards to food and food security.
And I think another thing it probably sort of puts a focus on is that if you allow your government to take the lead, perhaps your government are going to be late in the decisions they make. So you're better off making your own decisions now in your own backyard and doing something about some of these impending things that are happening with food security. Do it now before the government says you should do it.
Yeah.
Be ahead of the game.
Be proactive.
Be proactive. And,
So Sri Lanka's, like I said, $5 billion US dollars to ensure that the people's daily lives are not disrupted for the next 6 months. So they need money as well as growing their food. Now it is interesting because we look at these and when we talk to people about food security, people say, oh, that's that country, or it wouldn't happen here in Australia. But it was interesting because we were looking at this very recent report in Australia, so this was in May, which says Australia vulnerable to devastating global food shortages, and we're starting to see these reports more and more in Australia, aren't we?
Well, absolutely are, but I find it's amusing in a way, because if you go back 2 years ago at the time of the COVID pandemic, when people were sort of going into supermarkets and buying in bulk and stuff like that, our government said, we have plenty of food, we have enough food to feed, 3 or 4 times as many people as what's needed at the top time. But all of a sudden, a year or two on, now even places like Australia are warning of food shortages.
Yes.
And yet they've been telling us for ages we are so food secure that there's no need to even think about the problem.
Yes.
Now all of a sudden they've done a 180-degree turnaround, and they're telling us, hang on, wait a minute, you guys better think about doing something yourselves. So yeah.
So this was interesting, just showing, some of these charts are really good, just showing that, how quickly things are actually increasing. So this is for sort of from like December last year, and we can see that this is vegetable oil going up, cereals are going up, dairy, sugars and meats going up a bit there as well. This was interesting. So this was a Dr. Roe McFarlane from the University of Canberra, and says, we've been talking about these sort of scenarios, these very scenarios for 50 years. We've been speculating, we've been measuring, we've been applying our minds to making predictive models, but for various reasons we've not been taken particularly seriously. And he says that the global food production and supply system is proving as vulnerable as silicon chips, clothing, toys and fuels. We've centralised and commodified and simplified all the foods we eat. Sorry, female. That's made it incredibly vulnerable to the extremes in weather that are happening at the moment. In Canada, the US and Australia, we've seen some very extreme weather in Australia. And the ability to absorb conflicts like wars. So it's having an impact on food security in Western cultures, and this was an interesting one. Food for thought. Australia may produce a lot of food, and a lot of people say, no, we can grow all our own food, we're all okay. But that doesn't necessarily mean food security, this article points out. It's also about distribution, being able to get it to where people need it. It's about variety, it's about resilience, and that's with also weather, climate variabilities, and it's about price. And what we are seeing in Australia is some items are becoming very unaffordable for people.
She talks about the warning signs of potentially troubled future are appearing to come close to home. And this is what we started out talking about, Sri Lanka as being the canary in the coal mine. But if you go back up to she made a comment about the redistribution of food. Where was it again? So we've centralised and commodified and simplified all the foods we eat. So the big push was for over the 70s and 80s for globalisation is to have decentralised food supplies. Like one country grows a huge amount of this commodity, another country grows a huge, and now what you're saying, actually that wasn't a very good strategy. So that's made it incredibly vulnerable to the extremes of weather, but also supply chain issues and also all other issues.
We've got the fuel issues now. We've got transport companies, so it's costing them too much to transport
food. When we talk about food security, we have to start with ourselves, we have to start with our local communities, then it goes out to our state level, then it goes to a national level, then it goes to a global level, and what actually happened, we've got the reverse. We've got our food security, is our number one go-to is global, then it comes down, and at a local level, there's just hardly any food security at all. Very few people grow their own food, very few people save their own seeds.
I think people are doing it more now, though. Well, I think people are starting to...
What we're seeing, though, is that necessity is the mother of invention. When people, if they don't perceive a need, they won't do anything about it. But as you see inflation soaring, food costs soaring, certain lines not available at the supermarket anymore, then people start, okay, there's a need to do it now.
Yes.
So I think that's what's happening. People are more and more seeing the need to do it, but we need to do it quickly. Not leave it too long. We need to act now. And there's lots of ways we can do that. Absolutely.
And we've certainly covered that in our videos with lots of tips on how to set up food gardens and grow. But we did want to show one thing about just cheap meals, because I saw a report in Tasmania this week where there were some pensioners saying that they pretty much are skipping meals because they just can't afford the meals in the supermarkets. So we just thought this was an interesting little experiment. And we've been doing this for years, haven't we? Been looking at how far we can get meals to go, spread. And obviously we try to grow as much food of our own, but if we had to purchase stuff, what would be some cheap meals that, are good calorie, dense meals and, energy. So this is one that we come up with, which we thought was, a good one.
Absolutely. Well, this is actually, believe it or not, this is a 250...
I'm going to hold this up so you can see.
It's a cup, 250 gram cup of rice.
That's a lot of rice.
That's a reasonable serve.
That's
a reasonable serve. But that's about 40 cents at current prices.
Long grain
rice.
home brand rice packet.
That's 40 cents.
To cook that up, 40 cents. Yeah.
But one of the things we do, me and Sonia do, is that if there's anything on special at the supermarket, we'll grab it. For example, these cans of soup. There's a decent amount of soup in these cans. These are on special half price this week. So they're normally $3.50 Australian.
It's a big can. It's 505 grams.
So that's they were half price, so they were $1.75.
Yeah.
So even if you were to put half a can of heat that soup up, put half a can on a bed of rice, that meal comes in around about, what was it? It was $1.30 or something.
Yeah, I did actually write it down. So it was actually $1.05.
$1.05. So if you're a savvy shopper, buy a lot of your products, store some away.
Buy stuff when it's on special.
Buy stuff when it's on special. Keep a big pantry. You can actually do some main meals that are really, really cheap. You can do cheaper meals, but that's an idea. That's just one idea.
Yeah, this has got some veggies in it. It's got some meat in it. Not a huge amount of meat, but it's an Irish stew on top of a rice. You could put it on top of potatoes, mashed potatoes.
Mashed potatoes or anything like that.
Yep. And if you had some herbs or stuff in the garden, sprinkle on top some.
Yeah. So what our idea was that obviously when you look at food security issues, whether it be at a local level or international level, some of the topics can be quite heavy. But what we want to do each week when we do one of these is to give you some ideas.
Yep.
And that's just one simple idea.
So if you ate the whole can, if you've been in the garden on the tools and you're very, very peckish, and you ate all of that plate of rice and the can, that was a $2.10 meal. And if you had half of it, you said you had half for lunch and half for dinner, $1.05.
Yes,
a meal.
Yes.
I mean, that's like, where can you get a meal for $2.10?
It's pretty cheap.
So it's doable. So when I see things about pensioners or families saying we can't afford,
well, the classic one is you hear people say is I had to eat a can of dog food. I mean, dog
food's expensive.
Dog food's expensive.
Yes.
It's about 3 times the price of a nice meal like that.
Yes.
So there's no excuse for people.
No, people don't
eating
eat
dog food. Don't
no.
have to eat dog food. You just be
not whilst this sort of stuff is still in the supermarket.
Just be smart. Yeah.
While you're getting your garden up and running.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally the best thing is the fresh fruit and veggies from the garden. But if you have to
do it,
survive on some cheap meals, it can be done.
Yeah, because when we talk about food security, there's different levels of food security. There's daily food security, and that's there's weekly food security. There's monthly food security. And then you go, so you go short-term food security, medium-term food security, long-term food security. Then there's generational food security, where we're not only growing our own food, but we're saving our own seeds. But this would come as a short-term food security solution. You can duck down to your local supermarket while there's still food there.
While you're waiting for your veggies to grow.
Yeah, while you're waiting for your veggies to grow.
Yeah.
You can put a few cans aside. That's what
a few bags of rice.
And that's what we call short-term food security.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a form of food security we want to promote people to do. So it gives you a chance. It buys you time to be able to grow more of your own food.
Yeah,
absolutely,
for sure. Alrighty, well I think that's it for us today.
Yes.
So all the best. Happy gardening. Hope your gardening's growing really well.
Yeah.
And we'll see you in our future videos, and check out our YouTube channel. We're putting new content up all the time.
And the other thing is too, check out Sonia's. She did actually a clip on how to make a mince dish go 4 different ways, didn't you?
Yes.
And she did
got down to about $2.50 a meal.
Did all the costings and that, so just check that check that
that'll
video
be coming
out,
soon.
and that'll give you a bit more indication or idea what you can do with a small amount of money. Yeah. So, but until next time, have a great day, and we'll see you later.
All right, bye for now.
Bye.